Whoopensoccer. Noun. Something extraordinary of its kind. Whoopensoccer is a community arts outreach program in Madison, Wisconsin, and I am its self-proclaimed mayor. From the Dictionary of American Regional English, Whoopensoccer is an old Wisconsin word that refers to a special version of whatever noun you're talking about. If you've spent any time in the upper Midwest, you would not be surprised to hear someone say, "Oh yeah, we had a whoopensoccer of a party last night. It was a real good time." The word is simultaneously silly and local. Calling our program Whoopensoccer and creating a special place known as Whoopensoccer City where the program happens is an intentional choice. It allows us to create a whole world that we can co-occupy during our residency time. Teaching artists, kids, and classroom teachers all become a part of Whoopensoccer City as a way to acknowledge that we are doing something different than we typically do in school, but that all school people are welcome. This is Arts Educators Save the World, where successful artists and their mentors talk about how arts education transformed their lives. Hey! Welcome to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact that arts education has had on both of their lives. We are trying out a new format for this podcast. Don't worry, we will still be regularly featuring some of your favorite successful artists from all walks of artistry and the mentors who have helped shape their successful artistic practice. And, in the spirit of yes and, Alek and I have a lot of conversations off mic about the ways that we are seeing those conversations that we have with artists transform our own thinking about arts education and about the ways that we can be engaged with you all, our listeners, around key ideas in arts and teaching, arts and learning, and general art-making fun. And so we are starting a little mini-series of Alek and Erica Talks that are based on ideas from my book, How the Arts Can Save Education, but are really opportunities for us to chat with each other about these big ideas that you're hearing artists and their mentors talk about in their own practice and trying to kind of take them out of that context a little bit and talk about them in more general ways.
And I'm definitely interested in getting Erica to blow our minds a little more. That is, I think that there's certainly going to be a subset of humans and subset of listeners who get it, who are like, yeah, artists come into the school and they do great things. Or you can use art making practices in your other classrooms to kind of like make things cool. But I think there's probably a much larger percentage of people, especially if you had a more traditional education or if your children do, that maybe the extent to which Erica is suggesting and all of our guests are suggesting that art really transforms everything. I don't know how much that seeps in, that really gets through the shield that may be up. So a lot of the questions that I know I want to ask you about are there to just have you blow our minds a little about what you do in schools and what you've seen happen in schools. And as the book says, how the arts can save education.
I love that because I think these conversations are more quietly radical than people think.
Right.
And
yeah.
Blowing out some of that radicality is correct. Radicality is I think is, as my daughter would say, a great way for people to milk their brain cows. You're welcome. That's a Gracie Halverson special.
And no one asked, but in an incredible turn of events, Erica's daughter is going to go to my alma mater. And my alma mater of guests of the show, Craig Thomas and Bradley Whitford. And so shout out to Wesleyan University. We'll hopefully be on tour there one day soon. If you're listening from Wesleyan, just please invite us. We will come.
Can't wait.
So let's see what this is. Let's get started. And for listeners, who else would I be talking to? We're kind of rolling tape on this. With podcasts tend to go from anywhere from lightly to heavily edited. But we haven't got that kind of time. So Eric and I are going to use our 40 odd years of friendship to just act as proving ground, practice time for what we're doing here with you right now, which is just talking. We're just going to talk. It is a podcast after all. And we're going to start with what you heard at the top of the show there. Erica briefly defined for us a whoopin' soccer. Whoop, whoop. That's an ooh sound.
I mean, I think that's a regional accent situation, right? I have heard people call it whoopin' soccer. I have heard people call it whoopin' soccer. I think I tend to lean into my Midwestern Wisconsin accent when I use the word. So I call it whoopin' soccer, but whoopin' soccer also allowable.
So tell us more, please, in your own words now, what this thing is, why it is so important a concept for you that you said, I need to use this as the name of my arts program.
So I want to give you a little bit of history first of my work in arts education and community arts outreach and teaching artistry. So when I was an undergraduate at Northwestern University, I was part of an organization that I did not start that existed when I got there called Griffin's Tale. And many, actually, of my artist education friends, including Story Pirates co-founders Lee Overtree and Jamie Solka, were Griffin's Tale acolytes. And Griffin's Tale brought in stories written by kids from around the suburban Chicagoland area, and college-age actors created performances of the kids' stories and brought them to their schools. And it was very artistically satisfying for us and told us something we already knew, which was that kids who have opportunities to express themselves creatively will do so with full gusto and be able to appreciate and enjoy the value of professionals validating the work that they do. But it also led me and some of my colleagues to wonder whether and how we might work more directly with kids on the creative expression part of the work. So in Griffin's Tale, we were getting stories that kids have been writing in their schools as normal parts of their teaching and learning practice. We wondered what would happen if we could work directly with the kids. And so some friends and I started an organization in Chicago where we were all living that at the time was called Barrel of Monkeys and is now called Playmakers Lab. Pod guest Christina Anthony, if you recall from season 1, was a teaching artist and a performer with Barrel of Monkeys Playmakers Lab. We created an artist in residence curriculum where we would go into classrooms and spend time with kids thinking about and doing creative expression in a range of ways. So it looked like traditional creative writing, what you all might imagine in your classrooms, where we give kids story starters or we give them brainstorming activities, and that then they use those to make new ideas. But it also looked like, you are somebody who maybe resists the fine motor coordination of writing, but you have tons of ideas. How can we help you get those ideas out into the world, whether that's having you work with a partner whose motor coordination doesn't necessarily stop them from expressing their ideas, or having you create cartoons of your ideas that then can express for others what it is you want to make and do. Or maybe you want to improvise a scene because you're really gifted at coming up with characters on the spot and expressing them with your body and with your voice as another way to tell stories. So we developed an in-school residency program that allowed kids during their regular school day to engage in creative expression using some of the tools that teachers and schools recognize as standards for being a good writer in the 3rd and 4th grade. And then other tools that maybe are less recognizable in that space, but are more recognizable as like art making, theater making, improvisation. And we were doing that, and kids were learning stuff. And the kids who were learning stuff the most, or at least who the teachers described were learning stuff the most, were the kids who maybe otherwise weren't appreciated and celebrated for their genius at school. And the teachers seemed surprised by that. Oh, Alek never said a word before, and now I can't get him to stop talking. Or I didn't know that Doug was an expert in presidential politics, but now he writes endless stories about presidential elections from the 1800s. And so I actually went back to graduate school because I was so inspired by this idea that artistic approaches to standard practices in schools could change kids' lives and could lift up the genius of kids who otherwise maybe weren't being celebrated. So fast forward, and I'm a fancy professor at UW-Madison, and I'm living here in Madison, and I'm itchy to recreate some of that magic. But I acknowledged that Madison, Wisconsin in 2014 is a very different time and place than Chicago, Illinois in 1998. There are lots of differences in how schools work, lots of differences in working in a giant urban school district versus working in a kind of mid-sized, racially, ethnically diverse school district, but one that looks more like what our folks who live in big cities would consider kind of suburban life. Also different pedagogical approaches, different ways of teaching that, a lot changed between 1998 and 2014, including the entire lifespan of No Child Left Behind, which created a whole different way in which people thought about the role of school. So Whoopin' Soccer is a nod to all of that. So it's a nod to the idea that what we're doing is an extraordinary version of a classroom, and that it is grounded in the local experiences and practices and lives of the kids and the teachers and the teaching artists who do our work in Madison and in the state of Wisconsin.
My name is Graham Isidore. I have a progressive eye disease called keratoconus. Admitting I'm losing my vision has been hard, but explaining it to other people has been harder. Lately, I've been trying to talk about it. Short-sighted is an attempt to explain what vision loss feels like by exploring how it sounds. By sharing my story, we get into all the things you don't see about hidden disabilities. Short-sighted from CBC's Personally, available now.
Okay, so you pretty much answered all the questions that I want to ask for the next 3 or 4 episodes. So we're done.
Thanks for coming,
we're done
everybody.
here. Thanks for listening, everyone. No, in the book, you say, I shall quote you to you, that Whoopin' Soccer allows us to create a whole world that we can co-occupy during our residency time. What strikes me is that it implies that there's something with the old world that isn't enough for you or isn't the right place for you to do your work. What is it that's missing from the old world? What do you need to change, add on to? Why do you need to not just come in and do a show? Why do you actually need to create a world in order to do this?
I've spent a lot of time in education spaces, classrooms, after-school programs, summer camps, museums, and every space has its set of established routines and practices. And those are super important, right? Creating routines is what makes innovation possible If kids know what they can and can't do, that allows them to move freely within that space. And even the most progressive of classrooms has established routines that don't necessarily encourage the kind of creative expression that we know is what promotes kids' confidence, inclusion of their identities, seeing them as full human beings. So I'll give you a really small, simple example. We allow almost anything into a story. We have very few rules. Violence against other human beings, unless it's comic book violence, because we have found that expressing tendencies to want to explore ideas that are off limits is actually quite productive, right? So John Cena getting bonked on the head by a giraffe, that's allowed, right? But I punched my friend in the face, not really allowed in a public space. But I will say, if a kid was having a rough time and wanted to use the journal that we give them to write about that rough time and to keep it in a protected story that isn't read by anyone, that's actually something that we would encourage.
Can you tell me what you do in that moment that might differ from what if a student said, no, I want this in my play. I punched Larry. How do you handle that?
So there's a bunch of different ways to handle that, right? So we do a lot of what curricular experts, and I will come back to what the name of this is because it is escaping me in the moment, but the way they describe
very excited. This is a tease.
I do, we do, you do. And the reason for that is we always start with a demonstration of what we're hoping we can all do together in our work. So if we are writing dialogues, we will start with 2 adult teaching artists improvising a short scene with suggestions from the kids. Then we'll have the kids reenact the dialogues that the adults have made up so that they can feel what it's like to do that work. Then we will have the kids in groups write their own dialogues and then perform them for each other. And then we will culminate with a whole class performance where pairs of kids working together have spent some time not only writing their dialogues, but crafting how, they're going to engage with one another and like staging maybe and costume. Sometimes they get into it and they have costumes and props, and then they perform those for the class. And if at any point along that line, something comes into the space that feels like it might be harmful to someone else, we call it out in the moment. So we might say, this line of dialogue says, and then I punched Larry in the face. If Larry is part of the co-creation of that, and he's down to create a, Laurel and Hardy style, sketch comedy with fake head bonking and, we're into it. If Larry says, no, I don't want that, that hurts my feelings, then that's an opportunity for a conversation between a teaching artist and 2 kids about how we make things creatively with one another and how we explore complicated feelings and what kinds of spaces we can work those complicated feelings through with. So just another sort of quick set of examples. In Chicago, when we were working in Chicago, we worked with a lot of kids who had experiences with gang violence in their neighborhoods, the loss of family members. And this was often really present in their minds. And so we would encourage them to write about that. We have a day where we tell true stories. And sometimes those stories are silly. The time I forgot my pants, the time I got lost in the mall. Turns out a lot of kids have been lost in the mall. The time I fell off my bike. A lot of kids have fallen off their bike. And then sometimes it's like the time my cousin got shot.
Right.
And rather than saying like, no, that's not allowed here, we offer opportunities and mechanisms for the expression of those ideas. So when I say we co-occupy a space, what I mean is we have a set of rules and practices that may or may not be the same as what goes on in your classroom when Whoop and Soccer isn't around, but everyone in the space agrees that during these 90 minutes, this is how we're doing this. And sometimes that makes teachers uncomfortable. Sometimes it transforms their practice and their own rules and practices change as a result. And then other times teachers say, gosh, I'm so glad for Whoop and Soccer because I can't really afford to have these rules and practices all the time. So I'm super grateful that for 1 quarter out of every year, this is the way all of my kids have an opportunity to deal with ideas, to be silly, to be joyful, to bring their experiences in, to, write about dinosaurs literally all the time. I'm grateful that that space exists because, I can't really let them write about dinosaurs all the time because sometimes we have to write about indigenous tribes of Wisconsin. Sometimes we have to write about science practices. Like, I can't do that. And so we've had all of those different responses from teachers to this, very deliberate redesign of what it means to engage with each other.
It's great. And again, you touched on many things that we will get to in future episodes, specifically about your rules, your agreements that you have and how those work with existing agreements and what it means to have an agreement. Let me just close down with one last question here that relates to a lot of what you were saying. And by the way, apologies to everyone for my coughing here. The editing is gonna be kind of light on these episodes, and so
it makes us seem human. We're real people.
I need something to help
no
me seem
AI
human.
Involved.
Oh.
Need a cough drop? Don't need a cough drop. It's all real stuff happening here at Arts Educators
I'd
Save the
rather
World.
really not be happening. So the way you're describing one's time with Whoop and Soccer is fairly intense. You are asking, it could seem to the parent out there, to the teacher out there, or to the student, like you're asking quite a lot of them. We're getting together in groups. We're talking about our feelings. We're telling our stories. We're adapting those stories. We're getting up on stage. We're doing this. We're doing that. A regular segment here we're going to call Alek's Wife Told Me. So my wife, Sarah, is also an educator, and she wrote a book about an educational approach called Project-Based Learning, and the book was specifically about project-based learning, PBL, in early childhood. And she set out specifically to debunk myths. And one of the myths was this. A lot of teachers felt that they would need to front-load learning. So PBL is going to involve literacy, and it's going to involve research. It's going to involve all of these skills. And a lot of teachers had this, our students are too young. They can't do this. They don't do this. We need to do this first. And I would not be surprised if you heard this as well, especially considering the depth and breadth of what you're talking about. So as we close this one out, what is that interaction like with teachers if you tell them anything in advance, or as they start to see, oh my goodness, we don't do that and we're not ready for that? How do you confront that?
Well, first of all, we do always meet with classroom teachers before we start a residency because it's super important to engage them as partners and to find out the kind of partners they want to be. right? Are they teachers who say, I don't really know much about creative writing or performance, so I'm excited to see how this goes? Or all the way to actually this past season, we had several classroom teachers who came in, and we'll talk more about performance, I'm sure, other weeks. Stay tuned for that too, who came in as performers in our shows, who followed through into the next stage of what we do and actually got on stage and performed for the kids the stories that the kids had written, which was just phenomenal. But, oh God, what was the question? What do teachers...
How do you confront teachers who are unsure that their kids are, quote, ready for this?
And front-loading. So I think a few things. One of my go-to learning theories that helps explain how and why this works so well is something called just-in-time learning, which, among other geniuses, Jim G., who is, among other things, one of the founders of the field of research in video games and learning, wrote this amazing book about what good video games have to teach us about learning. And one of the principles in that book is that people don't pick up skills in the abstract. They are much more likely to make those skills a part of their practice if they have a reason to use them. So you can imagine, right? Like, we make this podcast. I have not been heavily involved in the editing, but I have had to learn some new software in order to be able to participate in our community of how we make this. If I would have taken a class first on how do you use this platform? I wouldn't have done it. I would have put it on double speed and sat there and played Candy Crush or whatever while it was playing in the background. And B, the parts of the software that I actually need would not have become apparent to me until I actually started using the thing. That is not just true of technology, although with technology, I think we've all had the experience of understanding why just in time, how do I use this button? Oh, what does this feature do? The same is true for complex cognitive skills. And so kids spontaneously develop the need for skills when they want to incorporate them meaningfully into their practice. So, for example, on playwriting day, we teach kids about the use of a colon with a character as a way to indicate dialogue. We don't give a lesson on all the features of a script. We say, here's the things you're going to need. You're going to need to know who's saying the thing, what they're saying, and if you want them to do an action, you got to write it in a different way so that your actors know what that action is. So parentheses allow you to separate actions from conversation. Done. And instantly, we can check those, tools off the list of things that kids need to know in order to write in different genres, right? And then explain to them the difference between embedding dialogue in a story, a narrative, and having dialogue as a play, and why you might write those differently. We never give that as a lecture because no one would listen and no one would learn it because it's not how people learn to do stuff. People learn to use tools when they need them. So that's the just-in-time feature for me is the answer to why you might throw kids into the deep end. And teachers are often surprised by how capable kids are of doing the kinds of complex skills that are required.
Well, you have answered that just in time for us to wrap up this episode, which listeners, Erica and I have not planned at all how we're going to wrap this up. So watch this. Erica, you want to wrap this up for us?
Sure. I think we're going to try, Alek and I, to have these little talks in between our traditional episodes. And we are picking out little nuggets of the book as opportunities to share ideas with you. If you have a question that you want us to answer and make the subject of a, what are we calling these? Alek and Erica Talks, chats.
We'll find something.
When we
also,
were
while you're writing to us, if you have a good name for what this is, include that too, please.
Yeah, that'd be great. Because right now they're all labeled Doug. And probably we don't want to call these Doug.
Call this a Doug. It could be a Doug. That could become a noun. He's not here to defend himself, so we're going to do another Doug next week.
If we're going to go do another Doug. So if you would like to ask a question, this is a great way to start a community conversation. So write to us at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com.
Say it one more time. I laughed at my stupidity while I was not remembering it. Say it again.
Contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. Put in the subject line, idea for chat. And
or for bonus points, idea for Doug.
Our idea for Doug. And we will include that in these future conversations. Alek, do we want to end the way we normally do?
Nope. I think I'm all improv'd out here. Yes,
Great.
No, and this is a no. I'll learn next week why I shouldn't have said no, but I'm saying no because I think we want to do the next one now.
Great. Onward together.
Onward together.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alek Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website designed by Cole Locasio at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We are on Instagram @artseducatorspodcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alek Lev.